be. Hi, and thank you for tuning in to a new episode about the Japanese SCF uniforms and unique airsoft. In this episode we are going to talk about the development van the Japanese Type 64 rifle, how it was used, until when it was used, and why it was developed by this combat rifle and not was sold to other countries. So before we begin, I want to thank my subscribers. They continue to support me. You really like this video, so I will do my best to make more and more videos in the near future. So, and also for the newcomers, please hit that bell notification button, subscribe, and hit that like button down below. Even the coronavirus is a little bit difficult at the moment, but together we will go through this. So, without further ado, let's start. In 1954, when the Japanese Self-Defense Force was created, they were supplied with leftovers from World War II weapons. The standard rifle was at the time the M1 Garand. But the Japanese saw 2 years later that the US soldiers who were stationed at Japan bases had the new combat rifle was the M14 rifle, developed in 1956. They also were slowly looking to a self-loading rifle that also had the capacity with a box magazine, 20 rounds, and also standardization to the 7.62 NATO cartridge, and also a full automatic capacity for the rifle. But they were not interested into buying the M14. They have tested the M14 in the field. There were some downsides, of course, because it was a pretty long rifle. The recoil system was a little bit too much for them. And also the full automatic capacity of the M14 was a little bit too much uncontrollable. So they decided to look abroad to make some prototypes weapons. And the first prototype was called the Rifle Type 1. We will go with Rifle 1 prototype. The Rifle 1 prototype used a gas piston from the FN Val series, from the FN factory in Belgium. The rifle looked almost identical to the AR-10 variation that later became the M16 that we all know to this day. They tested a bunch of few, but there were some dislikes about the weapon. I'm really not sure what the problems were with this, but they decided to develop a few more before they decide which weapon would better. The next rifle was called the Rifle 2, gas system from the AR-10 that used later on in the AR-15 and the M16 series that was later used by the United States Air Force, Ground Forces and Marines in the Vietnam War. It was almost identical to the Rifle 1 variation, but it still had some problems with it. So they made a Rifle 3 variation, also a short stroke gas piston, familiar with the FN Val, but this weapon, the Rifle 3 prototype, was almost identical with the SVT-40 Tokarev rifle from the Soviet Union. It was also a full automatic capacity, just like the other rifles, Type 1 and Type 2, of the Rifle 1 and the Rifle 2 prototypes. And they still suffered from the same mechanical problems, I think. Like I said, I do not really sure why they did not go one of these three rifles. So they developed two other prototypes. And this and the image looks almost identical to the rifle that was used by West Germany, the Bundeswehr from Germany. The last two rifles that you can see, the Type 64 prototype rifles that will become the standard Type 64 for the Japanese Armed Forces, still had some mechanical issues. I do not know if those two rifles were produced at the same time or separate in different years, but those rifles were the basic for the development from the rifle that we all know to this day, that's still used in the Japanese Armed Forces, that slowly will become retired in the near future. The last Type 64 prototype rifle is still using a short stroke gas piston, but we do not know if it was influenced by the FN Val short stroke gas piston or the SVT Tokarev semi-automatic full automatic rifle from the Soviet Union. One of those two had the most impact to the development for the short stroke gas piston. They use both short stroke gas pistons, but the design are a little bit different. But finally, one of those two was used in the development in the Type 64. But of course the Type 64 was not perfect. Even in the field tested it, they still had some bunch of few issues. Finally, the army and the high command and the government decided to starting production in 1965 with the Type 64 as standard combat rifle to replace the M1 Garand and other old World War II weapons that were used in the Japanese arsenal. But because Japan had a small reduced army that left between 50 and 80,000 men and women in service, the standard Type 64 will given especially first to special units, and those weapons will also deliver at the first stations at the northern part of Japan called Hokkaido. That island was the most closest to a possible invasion of the Soviet Union. It was between a sea and then the Soviet Union line. And there were also two islands less than a few kilometers from the Hokkaido coast from Japan, so a possible invasion through there was big. The Type 64 standard bullet round is a 7.62 NATO cartridge, but also a full automatic capacity standard as in prone position. So they reduced the recoil of the bullet, 10% less powder in it. So it is less powerful than the standard 7.62 NATO cartridge, but the FAL can also use the Japanese 7.62 NATO cartridge, and the Type 64 can use also the 7.62 from the FN FAL. Still, Japan had around 1990 to early 2000s around almost 200,000 men and women in service. So most of the weapons from the Type 64 are still frontline use. Production stopped at the same time when the Type 89 started production. So 230,000 rifles were produced eventually. But it does not say that the weapon was a really bad rifle, because it has never seen combat during the Cold War and possibly never will. It will still give in to the rearguard units and other units that will not see combat in Japan, but it will slowly phase out. And Japan is the only country using this standard rifle because of the laws and restrictions that government put it on the developing for other countries. So Japan is the only country using the Type 64. We will never know how good the rifle actually is in combat because it has never seen combat. Logistical, security forces and non-combat units. Some still using at parade and also the maritime self-defense was also still using it, because the Type 89 were still given to the Army and Air Force paratroop. But slowly the Type 64 will resign from combat use in Japan, because the new assault rifle is also coming to place this year. It was called the Type 20 combat rifle. It used also 5.56 assault rifle cartridge, just like the Type 89. It was a long video, but I still hope you enjoyed this video. Hit the like button, subscribe, hit that bell notification button, and if you have any to say about the M14 or the FN FAL or the Type 64 that are something that I totally missed, let me know in the comment section down below. That the Type 64 is also a bad rifle. Every weapon has its advantages and disadvantages. It depends on the soldier, and it depends on the training, and it depends on how it was used in combat. But we will never see how the Type 64 will see combat or everywhere around the world, because Japan is the only country using this model. So please do not give a vast opinion that the combat rifle of the Japanese is the worst weapon in history, only because it's a Nazi combat, medical breakdowns for example. So I still hope you enjoyed this video, and please let me know in the comment section down below what you think about the Type 64 rifle. Is the still half good rifle? Is the really worst rifle? But in my opinion it is good as a bad rifle. It is in between. Hope you enjoy it. See you next time.